We're just going to play a little stuff.
The cosmos, and I think when you look at how Bob and Doug complement each other, and how these SpaceX suits, they really complement the astronauts too, because they're more form-fitted, they're custom-made, and this is a moment where they're getting ready to do the real deal. And Lauren, I think the integration of the suit and the vehicle and these seats is just really, really impressive. How y'all at SpaceX did that.
Yeah, the primary purpose of the spacesuit, it's a pressure suit. Now, the Dragon capsule is already pressurized, so even in the vacuum of space, the crew is safe when inside of Dragon. But in the unlikely event of an anomaly that causes the capsule to depressurize, we can actually flow oxygen or nitrox into the suit, and that will keep the astronauts pressurized in flight. So that's its main purpose. So it's that form and function, and some style there as well.
And for the kids out there that have 3D printers or have 3D printed, the actual helmets were made by 3D printing. So you could be a spacesuit designer yourself because you already have the skill set, and or fly in space one day if you wanted to.
And we are looking at a live picture now of Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley walking down that hallway in the astronaut crew quarters. We just saw Doug wave at the screen, and they're just turning the corner, getting inside that elevator. And this, you can't see it from here, but there is a banner hanging there. You can kind of see it in the back. There's a banner hanging on the wall of the elevator with the signatures of all the people who worked on this mission. So it was really important for them to hang that up in there so Bob and Doug could see it. And there the doors are opening.
Here they come.
Great.
And there they are, NASA astronauts.
Small crowd, but big cheers.
NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, Doug on the left, Bob on the right, waving to the crowd there to cheer them on. And there are their families right in front of them.
The virtual hugs, a very special moment. Fist bumps.
Are you going to be on good behavior? Are you going to listen to mommy and make her life easy?
You can hear them.
Ready? Let's light this candle, I agree. Launch America! Bye, guys.
Now they are getting into the Tesla Model X that's going to take them to the launch pad, being strapped into their seats.
Their suit techs are attaching their umbilicals, so integrated into the Teslas. These are not just any Tesla you can just buy off the web or in a Tesla dealership. They've been outfitted with cooling units, and that white umbilical, similar to what you saw in the suit room, that umbilical is being connected to the suit to provide cooling air to the astronauts while they're on the way to the pad. And those Falcon wing doors are closing.
Super sleek.
A rapid departure from the Astro van.
Yes, I would say so.
And their flight surgeon is in the front seat in the passenger side, taking the journey along with them.
As I mentioned last time, we always think about the technology and the rockets, but this is what it's all about, the families coming together, supporting the families, us working together as a team to ensure they get up there safely and back home safely for their families.
I couldn't hear everything they were saying, but I did catch Bob telling his son to be good for mom and make her life easy. As a parent, I appreciate that.
Let's see that prominent NASA meatball.
There's our hangar. We process Falcon Heavy in there. There are other boosters in that hangar as well. And the rocket and Dragon that is on the pad right now was put together, or rather finally integrated inside of that hangar and then rolled out to that pad to go up vertical.
And there it is. That shot really gives you a sense of the scale of the Falcon 9 rocket. Those Teslas look teeny, teeny, tiny, making their way up there.
Yeah, really cool watching the Teslas pull up, driving on the launch pad just a few feet away from the vehicle. This is awesome and getting really excited over here.
Looks like they've already gotten out of the car and they are walking up to the elevator that will carry them all the way up to the 255-foot level, and then they'll have a couple of steps to get up to the level where the crew access arm is.
Core countdown 1 at 2 hours 57 minutes. The crew has arrived at the pad on schedule.
There they are, taken in the sight, craning to see the top of the Falcon 9 rocket. It's 230 feet tall if you round up, and then Crew Dragon is another 27 feet from the bottom of the trunk to the top of the nose cone. So when you're out there in person, it's really hard to describe just how large it is.
Look at them getting excited. They're ready to get in the vehicle, get in the elevator, and make it to the
Dragon
top.
SpaceX for morning briefing.
SpaceX Dragon, good morning, Anna.
Good morning. Great to hear your voice. I have 4 items for you.
It's great to hear yours as well. Good morning to you and Brian and the team. We're looking forward to rendezvousing with the space station today.
As are you. Really excited. As are we. Really excited to be here. I have 4 items for you this morning when you are ready to copy.
We are ready to copy. Go ahead.
All right, the first item is for thermal imager. Before you went to sleep, we briefed you that the thermal imager shuttering was expected during the warm-up period. One item to add is that we expect this behavior to continue after the warm-up as well, but at a reduced frequency. Thermal imager will turn on at approach initiation. By the time we get to the docking axis, we expect it to be shuttering roughly every 1 to 4 minutes.
Okay, that sounds good. That'll be a little bit better for the manual piloting event there, so that sounds good.
Concur. And next, your rendezvous complete time is expected to be 10:50 UTC.
Okay, rendezvous complete, 10:50.
Good copy. Thirdly, we received several non-required suggestions for the upcoming media event if you are interested. Feel free to call me back when we are done with this briefing if you would like to hear them.
Copy.
And fourth, we plan to go back on board with video at the conclusion of this briefing, if you are good with that.
We are good with that.
We copy, you're good with that. Do you have any questions for us?
No questions other than if there's anything particular on the media event coming up, please let us know. We're all ears.
Copy. We do expect the media event to execute at the planned time, using the coordination that you exercised similarly for the first event, and we are happy to give you some suggestions for discussion points during that media event if you would like them now.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
So the media team.
All right, so right now the crew is just getting their post-wake-up briefing, and we heard them walk through a couple of those. The first one was a thermal imager that they're going to be using during that approach and docking to the International Space Station. They'll also have it up during their manual flight tests, and they had noticed it was doing some shuddering. They had initially told the crew on the way uphill that was expected as it was just warming up, and it'll slow down once they get to the approach and docking.
That's right. The thermal imager is part of the suite of relative navigation guidance sensors. Earlier we were talking about how Dragon has flight computers aboard that are monitoring its position versus the International Space Station, and they're constantly tweaking the parameters to make sure Dragon is pointed the right orientation and approaching at the right velocity. So the thermal imager is part of that suite of relative navigation sensors, and the crew had noticed that it was flickering in and out, and that was expected.
And we also heard that they're going to get rendezvous complete, so that call out's going to come at 10:50 UTC or GMT. That's just 10:50 Universal Time. It's 3:50 a.m. Pacific over here in Hawthorne, and that is just going to be again a call out, just signifying that the rendezvous stage. So from just after separating the Falcon 9 until we're ready to get into approach initiation has complete. And then we also did hear that it looks like we're going to be able to go back on board with them. They were giving the crew a couple of suggestions, so we didn't want to spoil it for you, but we are expected to go on board once again with Bob and Doug right at about 3:45 a.m. Pacific time, so in about 45 minutes from now.
We got a chance to check out how they're enjoying the Dragon capsule on orbit right before actually their crew sleep period. I got to meet Tremor, the dinosaur aboard, and got to see some cool views of the interior of the spacecraft. And actually, I think Bob did a little bit of a flip inside, so taking full advantage of microgravity, which is great. So hopefully we'll get a chance to tag up with them again and see how they're enjoying the capsule after getting to sleep aboard. They had an 8-hour sleep period to test out that part of the capsule. And this is a test flight, and also to be prepared and alert for the upcoming approach initiation and docking events.
Yeah, and we also heard during that first media event they named their capsule Endeavour. Very significant to both of these crew members, as both Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley flew on the shuttle Endeavour during their shuttle flights. For Hurley, that was his first one, STS-127. I remember that mission very vividly. That was one of the first ones when I first got to NASA.
That's
they
cool.
Delivered the external facility of the Japanese module on board the International Space Station. Chris Cassidy, the current station commander, was also on that flight. And so these two have flown together, and they're going to meet up on the station in just a couple of hours from now.
Yeah, both Bob and Doug are spaceflight veterans. I think they each have 2 shuttle missions under their belt, and each of them have almost about 700 hours. I think Bob actually has just over 700 hours in space. And Doug has, I think, about 680, 690, but
Yep.
with Dragon now, he's probably over 700 too. They've been aboard the capsule now probably about, if you include the pre-launch period, about 12 hours.
We're a little past that. We launched 14 hours and 40 minutes ago.
Oh, that's right.
Time is flying.
And they'll be aboard the capsule probably about 24 hours total. The period to get to the station, they'll arrive about 19 hours after liftoff, and then there'll be a couple-hour period aboard while they're ensuring that they've got a good seal between the Dragon spacecraft and the International Space Station before they open the APAS hatch on the International Space Station side and the Dragon forward hatch on the top of the vehicle.
And that's all going to come, obviously, after we dock. We have been tracking about 7:30 a.m. Pacific for that docking. It could move a little bit earlier, a little bit later. All depends on how all of these final burns go. We're also listening in on the teams. They're starting to track out some new times potentially for that approach initiation maneuver that might be moving up a little bit earlier. And as we get kind of definitive times, we'll be sure to update you on our schedule. But that approach initiation, that's really going to put us right in the neighborhood of the International Space Station.
That's right. Approach initiation is going to take us into something called the approach ellipsoid. That's a 4 kilometer by 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer 3D ellipse that goes around the International Space Station. And that's really to help spacecraft that are operating in the vicinity make sure that they're staying outside of those operations unless they're coordinated with the folks in Mission Control Houston for something called integrated operations. I think we looked it up a little bit earlier, and if you're looking for a visual of how big that is, it's about 2 Central Parks in New York City right next to each other. So once we do the approach initiation, we'll get pretty close to the space station coming up along the R-bar.
Yeah, and right now we'll look at our data real quick. It looks like we're just about 38 kilometers or about 23, just under 24 miles of Dragon away from the International Space Station. So just continuing to close that gap. We're not going to have any other major burns. They might do a final approach out of plane burn on the way up before we get to that approach initiation. But we'll just continue to track that with the teams. We are waiting for that really final approach initiation time. Again, it might be moving up a little bit earlier. It was originally targeted for about 5:27 a.m. Pacific, but we'll wait and see if we get a new time from the teams as they just fine-tune Dragon's path to the space station.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, spacecraft right now is in eclipse, so that basically means that the Earth is blocking, the vehicle is in the shadow of the Earth. So probably don't have super great views of it right now because everything is dark. The Dragon spacecraft does on the service section, or the trunk as we refer to it, has a half of it is solar panels that they're conformal solar panels, so they contour to the shape of the trunk. There's a graphic of what the Dragon spacecraft looks like and how it's oriented. So about half of that is solar panels that provides power for the batteries, and the other half of that is a radiator that cools off the internals of the spacecraft, radiating away that heat to space. Unfortunately, we don't have the convection that we have on Earth and sort of the cool breeze, so the only way you can get heat away from a spacecraft is by putting that heat in a radiator and exposing that to something cooler and trying to get that heat off station. Off the vehicle, off the Dragon. And actually, in this graphic, if you're wondering what that section at the very top that looks like it's canted up, the little semicircular section, that's actually a representation of the nose cone, which is open currently. We actually opened that shortly after we separated from the second stage, did checkouts of all the thrusters on the vehicle, and actually checked out the guidance sensors and the avionics on the vehicle, just to make sure they're all healthy before stepping into those 5 major burns that's happened over the last about 24 hours.
Yeah, and that nose cone's going to stay open the entire time Dragon is in outer space. It's not going to get closed until just before they do that deorbit and reentry at the very end of Dragon's mission. So actually, when it's docking to the International Space Station, that nose cone will look like it's on the top part of Dragon as they're doing that final approach. When we'll see them dock to the Node 2 forward port on the International Space Station. But for right now, we're continuing to track. We heard the post wake-up briefing with Bob and Doug, so not tracking any issues with the vehicle. The only thing that was mentioned was the thermal camera, which had been having some flickering, and that was just due to some of the warm-up of it coming on, and it's going to be at a much more steady state by the time they get to that manual flight test and that final approach to the space station. We are just about a little over 30 minutes away, hopefully from that second check-in with Bob and Doug bringing us on board the Dragon spacecraft. I will note that we will have daylight this time, so hopefully that look out the window will look a little bit better than it did on the first attempt. We should have the sun coming up in just about 7 minutes from now on both Dragon and the International Space Station.
Yeah, actually on the first pass by, I was looking at the data. And I think we were about 4 minutes away from eclipse, so they were scrambling to try to get a view of the Earth before it went into shadow. Luckily, this time we'll have a much better chance at seeing what Earth looks like from the windows on the Dragon spacecraft. But Bob and Doug were actually kind of talking about the windows when they gave that tour earlier, how they could see during the ascent portion, and now as the spacecraft is rolled and oriented to make sure that those solar panels are pointed to where the sun would be. They could see some pretty stunning views of the Earth. I think they mentioned specifically flying over Newfoundland, and they definitely ended up flying over Los Angeles and Hawthorne at one point. A lot of my friends here were pretty psyched about that, to see space station overhead and Dragon as well.
And I mean, the space station itself flew directly over the Cape about 2 minutes before their launch. And Chris Cassidy, the commander on board, was able to snap some really cool photos that you can check his Instagram at AstroSeal, where those have been posted. And I mean, literally just minutes before. And we can bring up, and here is that photo. So again, this is a photo from the International Space Station just 2 minutes before launch, as the International Space Station was passing directly over Pad 39A there at the Kennedy Space Center. At the time of launch, the station was already over North Carolina, though, so that just gives you an idea of how fast they're moving while they're up in orbit.
From Chris's point of view, the weather doesn't look too bad from there. It looks pretty nice.
Yeah, we got really fortunate. We just kind of had the clouds open up. We had a good corridor, not just there at the Cape, but the whole way up the eastern seaboard, where we have to track weather for all of the different potential abort zones for Dragon. It goes all the way up from the Cape, all the way past Newfoundland, up the east coast of the U.S. and Canada. There's a short, or pretty long space in the very northern Atlantic where it's very cold up there. You're pretty remote, so you don't want Dragon to go down there. So we'll either do a retrograde maneuver to go back towards Canada, or what we call forward onto Shannon, so actually moving out over off the coast of Ireland. Thankfully, we didn't have to do any of that today, but the weather was looking good at all those abort zones, and that's just something we have to take into account. There's so much more you have to look at weather-wise when there are people on board.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, sometimes we talk about it internally, so much effort and testing that went into the Super Draco system. But, ideal mission, you never ever have to use it, because you get off of the second stage, you get to orbit, and then you just use the Draco thrusters to make your way to the International Space Station. So happy to see that we didn't have to exercise the Super Draco system today. And hopefully we won't have to exercise it in the future either. The Super Draco system actually safed right now. It safed shortly after we got on orbit. We've only been using those Draco thrusters. The Draco thrusters actually use a hypergolic propellant. So it's a propellant where when you combine the fuel and the oxidizer, it'll actually create that awesome fire that propels the spacecraft and gives it some impulse. So for Dragon, it uses monomethylhydrazine and NTO as its fuel and oxidizer. And we've seen a few of those burns and a few animations of the burns from the service section checkouts and the forward bulkhead checkouts earlier today.
Yeah, we've walked you through Dragon a couple of times, and just to do it once more, it is kind of split into two pieces, where you have the Dragon capsule itself up on top. That's the pressurized section. That's where the crew is. It's where you can store cargo, all the life support system. You can see the gray spots where the launch abort motors are integrated directly into the Dragon body. It's about 27 feet from the very bottom of the trunk all the way to the top of the nose cone.
Yeah, and actually, as you saw the vehicle spinning around, that the black side there represents the solar panels, and the white side there represents the thermal radiator. That's all on the service section of the vehicle that primarily exists to allow the vehicle to operate in space. We'll actually jettison that service section when we get to the deorbit part of the mission, quite a ways from now. If everything looks healthy on the vehicle, again, this is a test flight. If everything looks healthy, Dragon will be on the space station somewhere about 4 months, close to about 115 to 120 days. So the service section will be well in use on the capsule as it's attached to the space station.
Yeah, we're expecting that the flight for Bob and Doug to last up to that 4 months. One of the things we're going to be looking to do as soon as this flight is over is get to that next one, that Crew 1 flight, that first full-up operational mission as quickly as possible, up to about a month after Demo 2 is concluded. So it's all going to ride on how this Demo 2 flight goes. Obviously, there's some certification work that has to happen. This is that really final test, though, for NASA to certify SpaceX to begin doing what we call operational flights. So just a regular cadence of long-duration missions. So crew members going up for 6 months or even longer at a time on board the Crew Dragon. This is the whole reason we have the commercial crew program, and we're going to start flying 4 crew members at a time. We've already identified the first 4 crew members to fly in Crew 1. It's going to be 3 NASA astronauts, Mike Hopkins, Victor Glover, and Shannon Walker, and 1 astronaut from our partner agency, JAXA, the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, Soichi Noguchi, who's going to be making his 3rd flight into space. So a couple of veterans on board. For Victor Glover, it's going to be his first space flight. I'm really excited to see him get in the mix. He's an incredible person. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to see him up in outer space.
Yeah, it's been really fun. We've actually had all 4.
Dragon SpaceX for media event configuration.
Sounds like they're talking to the crew to get ready for our look inside Dragon, which again we're tracking to come in about 30 minutes from now. And in just a couple of moments, we should be coming up on sunrise.
Go ahead, Anna.
We are about to begin the ground configuration for the media event. Please be aware that the cabin lights will be adjusted slightly by the ground, and please also turn off any task lights that may be on. Finally, please retrieve the floater camera and let us know when you have it out.
Okay, we'll turn off the task lights and go ahead and pull out the media camera.
We copy, thanks.
So the core there, Anna Menon, talking to Doug and Bob on Dragon, letting them know that they're going to do a little bit of configuration. They were talking about a floater camera. We actually have 6 cameras on board the Dragon spacecraft that the ground team uses for a variety of monitoring and troubleshooting. The floater camera is actually a troubleshooting camera, and we got to see some cool views from the first media event earlier on before their sleep period. So just getting those things configured, squared away, making sure that they work.
Yep, and Anna Menon's going to be the voice talking to Bob and Doug throughout all the final phases of this approach and docking. She, again, is the core. That's a new position for human spaceflight. Stands for the Crew Operations Responsible Engineer, and it's seated right behind us in the Mission Control Center here in Hawthorne at SpaceX headquarters. And she's going to be the voice that we're going to hear throughout. Over in Mission Control Houston, one of our newest astronauts, Josh Kutrick, from the Canadian Space Agency, is going to be the voice talking to the crew once they're on board the International Space Station. Once we get a little bit closer, we'll hear some talk about something called the Big Loop. They're essentially going...
And Anna, we've got the media camera out at this time.
We copy, the media cameras out. Thank you.
The media camera getting set up for our look inside of Capsule Endeavour, as they christened it. Should be in about 30 minutes from now, and we'll be in sunlight, so maybe get some better looks out of the window. But again, once we get a little bit closer, we'll hear something called the Big Loop get configured. On the Dragon side, they're talking to the crew on Dragon to grounds through the TDRS satellites, and on the space station side, we talk through the space to grounds. And once they get in close proximity to the station, we tie all of those communication loops together so we can talk directly and we can hear all of those conversations simultaneously on Dragon, on the space station, in Houston, and here in Hawthorne.
Yeah, you mentioned the TDRS satellites. That's the tracking data and relay satellites. There's a network of these satellites that NASA put up into orbit, and they provide telemetry and commanding capability to both the Dragon spacecraft and to the International Space Station, and of course to other spacecraft that coordinate with NASA to use them. And that's actually how we're able to give you some of this telemetry, and how our control teams both in Hawthorne and in Houston can coordinate with both the space station and Dragon and issue commands and see how the health of the spacecraft is going. So as we've been talking through, and we've mentioned a couple of times, the folks on the nets talking about the quality of burn and whether it's nominal or not, and when burns have started, they're using data from a combination of those ground stations and the TDRS satellites to understand how the Dragon vehicle is performing, which is great, especially because it's a flight test.
And just to kind of check in on position, we're over the southern Atlantic part of the ocean right now, both Station and Dragon flying just a little ways behind it. They're about to cross over what's known as the Terminator line. That is the line on the Earth between night and day. So at this point, the sun has risen on the Station and on Dragon. So we'll continue to keep an eye out and see if we start getting any more views. If they're able to track Dragon as it continues to close in on the International Space Station. The orbiting laboratory itself, 270 statute miles over planet Earth right now. They actually just crossed over the Falkland Islands, and they're going to continue to swing up over the southern Atlantic into this orbital daytime.
Yeah, and Dragon going about 17,100-ish miles an hour. It's also about 35 kilometers right now from the space station. So if we get lucky, we might get some views of Dragon as it's getting closer and closer. Earlier on in at least our segment, we had some views of Dragon when it was about 50 kilometers away. So looking forward to seeing it get crisper and crisper.
And at this point, we are roughly co-elliptic, and we are starting to capture Dragon again. The Cronus officers over there in Mission Control Houston controlling all of those external cameras on the International Space Station. It's still co-elliptic with the station right now, so it's roughly 2.5 kilometers below and then several kilometers behind. So we are still a little under 35 kilometers away. It's about 21.5 miles and just continuing to close in. We should hear the rendezvous complete in about 30 minutes, so that might come while we're on board once again with Bob and Doug, which we're looking forward to that in about 25 minutes from now.
We've got some views on your screen right now. On the right side is a view from, transition to a view of us in Mission Control. Earlier on your screen was a view of the Dragon spacecraft, little dot, a view from the space station. I think that left view was probably of Node 2, right? Or was that a different view of the International Space Station? Right now it's Dragon.
I'll need to see it again, but yeah, right now we're continuing to track Dragon as it gets a little bit closer. Right now, and we're just continuing to check our data. We're about 35 kilometers away, so still a little over 21 miles away. And we're a little over 20 minutes away from that check-in with Bob and Doug on board the Dragon spacecraft. Let's take a moment now, just head down to Mission Control Houston, check in once more with Gary, where I think he's got the Orbit 1 team coming on console. So over to you, Gary.
Thanks, Dan. Yes, we've just completed our handover. The Orbit 2 team, led by Flight Director Zeb Scoville, is here in the room. Everybody's checked in and ready for Bob and Doug to arrive, a docking scheduled a little bit from now. A lot coming up here in the next couple of hours aboard the International Space Station. Chris Cassidy just completed his workouts for the day, completing his resistive exercise on the ARED that simulates sort of weightlifting, and also completing his exercise on the treadmill. One of the requirements for Dragon docking is for the cupola shutters to be closed. That has been completed, and he's scheduled for a conference with some flight controllers here in Mission Control Houston to go over the rendezvous procedures coming up here shortly. Within the next 2 hours, he's got a couple of items to take care of. One of them will be opening the hatch to the pressurized mating adapter. Just a little bit earlier today, the pressurized mating adapter itself has been equalized, and The cabin air has been introduced into pressurized mating adapter. The hatch is still closed. It'll be opened by Chris Cassidy a little bit later today. He'll set up some cameras and start venting the pressurized mating adapter once it's open. A lot's happening in just under 2 hours, though. Right now, we have a good connection one way from the International Space Station to Dragon through the C2V2 common communication for visiting vehicles that establishes a communication link between ISS and Dragon. Right now, just going one way. We got a radio S-band connection one way from the International Space Station to Dragon established. That's looking good. We need bi-directional communication. So a lot's going to happen once that's established here in just a little under 2 hours. We'll establish something called the Big Loop that'll combine the Dragon to ground audio that you're hearing from Dragon with the space to ground aboard the International Space Station. That'll be put together once we have a bi-directional communication with C2V2. In addition, right now, International Space Station attitude is as normal, but right about that time where we establish bi-directional communication with C2V2, we'll move some of the thrusters from the U.S. segment over to the Russian segment only. The Russian segment is at sort of the back of the International Space Station. Any of the firings or plumes will be far away from the Dragon and won't interfere with the docking operation. That's standard attitude control happening just about the time that we establish that communication. Also about that time is when we'll be go for approach initiation. Expected to be slightly early on that approach initiation, everything going per the timeline, even a little bit early. Right on track for Bob and Doug to dock here, upcoming today. That's it from the International Space Station Flight Control Room. Everything going according to plan. All the checks underway and right on the timeline. With that, I'll pass it back over to you over in Hawthorne.
All right. Thanks so much, Gary. We're just listening in. They're getting just kind of a rundown right now on the Dragon system with the flight director over there in Houston. The approach initiation burn is going to be moving up, as I think we were just hearing. So we're targeting that to come at about 12:09 UTC or GMT. That's going to be 5:09 a.m. over here on the West Coast. So Dragon moving ahead of schedule. We were tracking a docking time at about 7:30 a.m. Pacific, but we might even get ahead of that depending on how everything else goes.
Yeah, there's definitely a few steps in between there. There's a couple of go, no-go polls. And of course, we've got the translational manual piloting test that'll happen when Dragon's about 220 or so meters from the station. So still a few test things to do yet. But, right now, some cool views on your left screen of the International Space Station. And on your right, seeing something that looks less like a speck and more like a Dragon capsule. So excited to see that getting closer and closer. Right now, Dragon about 33 kilometers from the station, about 428 kilometers above the Earth's surface, making its way slowly towards the space station.
And as Shiva was just saying, still a couple of steps. One of the steps that not necessary for the rendezvous, but we're going to be looking forward to in just about 20 minutes from now, or actually about 15 minutes from now, or 20.
Good morning. And Dragon Tally Ho, I know you guys probably see it on the video cameras, but with the naked eye we can see it as well. Looking like a nice, shiny, new friend.
And Station on 2, good morning to you as well, and thanks for pointing that out. I hadn't, but I see it now.
So pretty cool. We were, as part of our nets, we can hear station to ground and a couple of folks on station confirming that they could see Dragon with their just with their eyes, without a telescope or anything.
Yeah, the Expedition 63 Commander Chris Cassidy confirming a tally ho, and we'll have those space to grounds in the mix so you can follow along. But he's just getting awake and up and running on board the International Space Station. Chris Cassidy's mainly going to be in a monitoring mode. He'll actually have the ability to send commands to Dragon as just another layer of redundancy built into everything. But he's going to be watching during this final approach.
Yeah, if you watched our coverage during the Demo 1 mission, then at the crew aboard at the time issued a few commands to turn on a blinking light on the Dragon spacecraft just to exercise the system. The crew aboard space station act as another layer of redundancy if something were to go wrong. So I'm sure he's very excited to be part of this test and to see his friends Bob and Doug coming closer and closer to station.
Yeah, but But we'll be checking inside the capsule with Bob and Doug in just about 15 minutes from now. Some of the other major milestones that we're going to be looking forward to, again, is going to be that approach initiation burn. We're tracking that to come at right about 5:09 a.m. Pacific, 12:09 GMT or Universal Time. And that'll be the burn that's going to bring us in really close to the space station. At that point, we'll be about 7.5 kilometers behind, and that's going to bring us just 400 meters directly below the International Space Station.
There'll be a call out here from the core, probably in about 20 or so minutes for rendezvous complete. Bob and Doug will have a few actions that they'll need to take care of there. And so we'll be sure to give you the play-by-play as that's happening, and listen in as the ground teams and crew aboard Dragon coordinate these next steps.
All right, we are just 15 minutes away from that second check-in with Bob and Doug taking us on board and a quick look through the Dragon spacecraft. They woke up several hours ago. Their wake-up time coming right at about 1:45 a.m. Pacific.
Station Houston on Space Ground Super Chris conference. We're ready anytime you are. No reply needed, but we're ready to go, or we can go on time.
Yeah, just getting 2 minutes.
And Chris Cassidy on board the space station is about to do just a quick rendezvous conference. So he's been doing a lot of training just to get ready for this, everything that he's going to be responsible for. He's largely just monitoring Dragon during its final approach. And then he's been having a lot, or he'll have a lot of tasks to actually get the hatches ready to open up. So again, you're going to be hearing communication coming from a couple of different paths. You're going to hear the core here in Hawthorne talking directly to the crew on board Dragon. And for this morning and for our approach, it's going to be Anna Menon. And you're also going to be here Josh Kutrick, one of our newest astronauts from the Canadian Space Agency, talking directly to Chris Cassidy and the crew on board the International Space Station. And pretty soon, in a couple of hours, all of them are going to get pulled together, and they'll all be able to talk simultaneously with each other.
Yeah, and in our procedures, there's some call-in points, there's some synchronization points. The cores try to keep the crew apprised, especially after burns or after events, to let them know that the ground is monitoring. If there were to be any kind of an alert or caution on the vehicle side, core would also hop on and let the crew know that the ground has that caution and is working it. So a really important relationship between the ground operators and the folks on the spacecraft, goes back all the way to the early days of the Flight Operations Directorate and the Mercury and Gemini programs.
Yeah, and it's been pretty quiet, and that's mainly because we haven't really been having any issues with the Dragon spacecraft. We know Bob and Doug beforehand talked that they wanted every piece of insight possible into Dragon on their way uphill. So any alert, anything that could possibly happen with the spacecraft, they wanted to make sure it was on their displays, and they wanted that feedback fed to them from the core. And it's been pretty quiet. We haven't had any major systems issues with the Dragon spacecraft that we've tracked the whole way uphill.
Yeah, honestly, I hope it's been a little bit boring for them. Just a quick little ride up to the space station. I know it's super exciting for all of us here at SpaceX and for everyone who's watching live. But ideally, we want the flight test to be pretty boring.
That is the goal.
If you're just joining us live on your screen right now, the left-hand screen is a view of the Earth from the International Space Station, camera aboard that. On the right-hand screen is actually a view from the space station. Oh, well, there was a view there on the Dragon spacecraft from the space station. Hopefully we'll get that back. So it's getting closer and closer to space station. It's right now about 31 kilometers away from the space station, and just wow, that when you look at it like a speck like that, it just really puts into perspective how vast distances in space are. Both the ISS and Dragon are going about 17,500-ish miles an hour, going really fast, zipping around the Earth. I think when we looked that up earlier, it's about a 9-minute trip from LA to New York, which I would love.
I would definitely get on that airline. And just a reminder, so that view on the right, that is from a camera outside the International Space Station. Those are being pointed by a person on the ground.
Dragon SpaceX for upcoming media event configuration.
Go ahead.
Yes, we have some early ground station coverage, and thus we have several requests for you. The first is just a reminder to please turn off the lower task lights as well.
Okay, we'll take a look, and I do not think we turned them on.
Copy. Secondly, we would like you to do the sync test at this point, and for that we ask that you please use the cabin mic and count verbally to 15 with mouth visible to the camera.
Okay, if you're ready for that, we are.
And we are ready.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15.
Thank you for that. We've gotten confirmation of a good sync. And finally, during the first media event, we actually noticed a good bit of reflection from the windows when you tried to show us the Earth view. We are hoping that this will be mitigated now that we are in full daylight, but to pre-test this, do you mind going over to the window at this point and giving us a view so we can see how that looks?
And so right now the core here, Anna Menon, just walking the crew through a couple of early setups as they get ready to bring us on board one more time. You heard them doing a long 15 count, and it's something. It's something that almost seems a little bit mundane.
It's interesting. I think we've all had that moment of putting on like wireless headphones, trying to watch a movie, and then everything's a little bit out of sync. That's what the test that we were just doing, make sure that the mic feed is in sync. And really, we need the ground stations to get high quality video footage. So we have you may have heard Anna mention, we have good ground station coverage, so we wanted to do a couple of tests there before this, which makes me really excited because that means we're getting pretty close to getting back on board the spacecraft.
Sounds like they'll have a slew or an attitude change shortly after we come on board, which we should be in about 7 minutes. We said this a little bit earlier, even the behind-the-scenes technical checkouts, all that stuff, that it still feels pretty surreal that we're doing this on board an entirely new spacecraft with humans. So we're going to get to go on board with Bob and Doug in just about 6 minutes. The sun is up, so we'll get a much better view out of the windows on board the Dragon spacecraft.
Yeah, you mentioned how surreal it is. I think I had a moment before the crew had even gotten on board the vehicle where it was just the 4 seats with the crew arm attached. I think that was the moment when it really hit me that, oh my God, we're flying people.
It didn't really hit me until we saw blue skies. I was definitely holding out for the weather. We had that scrub about 17 minutes before a flight on Wednesday, and things weren't looking super great on Saturday, but we kind of managed to shoot the gap. And as we saw from those images from the space station, it almost looks like we had a corridor of clouds that were just on either side of our ascent trajectory. So the weather did cooperate. We were able to get them on orbit. And I mean, right now they're over planet Earth, orbiting at about 270 miles over. They're actually right over the Democratic Republic of the Congo, so flying over Central Africa, and they're on a northeasterly trajectory. So they're going to cross over Sudan, the Red Sea, and the Arabian Peninsula before swinging out over Central Asia.
Yeah, and Dan, you mentioned the weather. I mean, I think a lot of people may look at how the weather is directly at the Cape and say, hey, it looks great, like, why don't you launch? But really, it's all about weather along the entire ascent trajectory. The Dragon vehicle does have an integrated launch escape system, so if something were to go wrong, the entire ascent portion, the Super Dracos could then fire and safely take the Dragon spacecraft away from the Falcon 9. We actually got a demo of that during the in-flight abort demonstration test. So when we're considering weather, it's really a check all along that ascent corridor to make sure that the sea state and the wave heights and the clouds, thunderstorms, all of that wouldn't impact recovery operations if we did have that unlikely abort scenario. So luckily, things worked out for us. We were able to launch. I think launch time was 3:22 p.m. Eastern time yesterday. And now we're about, I want to say 15 hours into the mission.
Yeah, we could pull up our clock real quick. We are 50, you're right on, 15 hours, 19 minutes and counting into our mission since we launched from Cape Canaveral. We are just about 4 minutes away from Bob and Doug bringing us once more on board the Dragon capsule. I think we saw it called Dragon Ship Endeavor, as we saw Elon tweet out. But the crew revealed that they named it Endeavor in honor of both of their, really. Two things really. Both of them obviously flying on the Space Shuttle Endeavor, which itself also pulled its name from a famous exploring ship.
Yeah, and actually they had some really cool words there for the Endeavor here between SpaceX and NASA for this venture into commercial vehicles taking people to orbit. Dragon is the first commercial vehicle to take people into orbit, and hopefully will be the first commercial vehicle to take people to the International Space Station. So, those docking steps happening. about 7:20 a.m. The timing might adjust a little bit. Kind of depends on how well the approach steps go.
Yeah, we heard the approach initiation burn did move up about 18 minutes up to 12:09 GMT, which is just about 5:09 a.m. over here on the West Coast. While we are just a few minutes away from getting back on board with Bob and Doug, some behind-the-scenes tests are still happening. They're still doing tests of that C2V2 connection between Dragon and the space station itself. That's the common communications for visiting vehicles, and that's going to establish a data and a command link between the Dragon spacecraft and the station on board. Just gives another path for data to flow back down to the ground, again, coming from those TDRS satellites that both Dragon and the space station are communicating with. And when we're over some of the SpaceX ground stations, as we are now, we're able to get data down, also able to get video down from the Dragon spacecraft, which we're going to be seeing in just about a minute from now. But I mean, meanwhile, view on the right, Dragon getting bigger and bigger. We're continuing to close in. Right now, we're under 30 kilometers away. We're about 28.5 kilometers away, or about 17.8 miles from the International Space Station. And we're on that co-elliptic orbit. We're just kind of catching up from behind now.
Yeah, the International Space Station is on a slightly elliptical orbit. So co-elliptic orbit meaning that Dragon's apogee syncs up with the station's apogee, the apogee there being the highest point of the orbit, and the perigee, which is the lowest point of the orbit. Those two will sync up as well. So right now, Dragon's apogee about 432 kilometers above the Earth's surface. Not quite at apogee yet. About 15 kilometers from apogee. So.
All right. Well, we'll listen in. We should hear the call now to come on board any moment. Just a reminder, the rendezvous complete will happen during this event, and that largely just signifies that we've completed all of the maneuvers from the separation of Falcon 9 up until this point prior to approach initiation. And as Shiva, I think, talked about, there's a couple of steps for the crew that they'll get into once they're complete with our look inside Dragon. And it looks like we might be getting the videos synced back up with good ground station views. Standing by to go on board with Bob and Doug.
Dragon SpaceX, we are go for you to begin the media event at this time.
Dragon copies. Well, good morning, everyone from Endeavour. We had a great night last night, got to get a little sleep, and as you can see from the video, we are just passing over Saudi Arabia in the Middle East. A beautiful day pass right now. And heading northeast up towards Central Asia, and then we'll work our way out the western part of the Himalayas there, and work our way all the way out over, looks like Japan, out into the Pacific for this particular pass. If you look closely in the video, you can see just a sliver of moon kind of halfway between the surface of the Earth and the window pane as we're flying at about 17,500 miles an hour around the planet. getting pretty close to ISS. When we were in the night part of this orbit, we actually got to see ISS out the window, which was pretty neat to see it for the first time on this trip. Bob's panning the camera back now, just kind of taking a look at around the cabin just to see how things look after a cruise lived in Dragon for an evening. We last night, the way things went, we had our normal activation, got out of our suits, had some a little bit of dinner, then reconfigured the cabin for orbit ops. Did a couple other events, including the media event last night, and then we proceeded to get ready for bed, which in space takes a little bit longer than I think on planet Earth. We had to pull out sleeping bags and sleeping clothes and all those kinds of things. Got kind of cleaned up, and then we ended up sleeping just like we are right now, right in our chairs, which was actually a pretty comfortable night's sleep. One of the things we did yesterday was actually manually fly Crew Dragon for the first time, and I want to compliment the teams at Hawthorne. Just a spectacular job with the simulator, as the vehicle flew exactly like the simulators out in Hawthorne. So just want to thank the teams that did all the work on that particular training device, as well as all the modeling and the GNC. It really worked out well and was a joy to fly. And I'm guessing it was the first time a space vehicle was flown with a touchscreen before. So we got that going for us. I'm going to hand the mic over to Bob.
Well, hello, folks. Welcome aboard the Dragon Capsule Endeavor. Doug and I had a good night's sleep last night. We were surprised, I think, at how well we actually slept aboard the vehicle. A little bit quieter than Space Shuttle, a little bit more, I guess, environmentally controlled. So we had didn't have CO2 pockets or things like that building up, giving us congestion, which was super awesome. He talked a little bit about the changing and going back and forth between our suits and our sleepwear and the clothes we're in now, and managing all those things. But we've managed to keep the ship pretty tidy at this point as we went through the night's activities and then got into our preparation for today. We did get our suits dried out, get them packed away into the black bags that are stowed in the outboard seats. You can, if you look closely, you can see we've got them strapped in with the regular straps that you'd use for riding into orbit, and then over against kind of that former window location, there is a you can see Doug's sleep bag there next to his crew notebook, and so that's how we're keeping all of our laundry constrained floating all around today. Doug mentioned the manual flying and how well the simulator matched that. I'll tell you that for the ride uphill on Ascent, they just are never able to capture that at the simulator. And so I think Doug and I were talking about all the observations that we had all the way uphill. While it was an exciting ride, I think we got a couple of minor surprises just in terms of the way the vehicle is kind of moving and shaking and taking you into orbit. You can tell that it's fighting against the Earth as it makes its way into space, and that's just something a simulator can never truly simulate. We do have a friend on board with us. We introduced you to Trimmer yesterday when we did our little activity with the camera. Trimmer also had a good night's sleep. I know that both of our sons are pretty happy about that with their pet dinosaur making it into orbit, and and having a good night in zero gravity. We plan, once we get on board the space station, to reunite Trimmer with Earthy and plan to bring both of them back to Earth. I know that we'll get Trimmer through the safety brief and get all the education that's required so that we'll have a safe operation while we're on board the space station should anything come up that we need to be prepared for. I know that Trimmer's also looking forward to helping us out with EVA preparations, just in case we need to do a spacewalk, and so we're looking forward to that as well.
2 minutes until LOS.
Let's see, I think we'll go ahead and bring the camera out a little bit, and we'll show you what's going on underneath the seats on board the Dragon capsule Endeavour. We've got quite a bit of cargo that we'll be taking to the space station. We've got some hard racks as well. The hard stowage that we have can also be swapped, these hard containers here, for powered cargo, which lets us bring back refrigerated things from the International Space Station. And if you're super lucky, we don't have that this time, but I bet you some crew will take ice cream to the International Space Station with those. That'll be exciting for those crews to get to have that. We do have some emergency equipment labeled in red, which is nice to have and easy to see, as well as the other stowage bags that we have down here as well. I don't know if you were watching closely during our strap-in and insertion on the pad, but we did have the seats rotate at one point. We were down in an easier configuration to ingress the vehicle in, so when we climbed aboard, the seats were rotated down, and after we were strapped in, they rotated up our activities. And so those seats will rotate again in preparation for splashdown when we eventually come home. So if any of you all know Uncle Kirk Shireman, as we call him, you could ask him when we're coming home and make sure that he starts having a plan for us.
Well, we appreciate you having them coming on board again with us on Endeavour, and enjoyed showing you around both inside and out. The next time we'll be on video for you. We'll hopefully be on board Chris Cass in just hours. So we appreciate you stopping by and from Endeavour.
All right, it looks like
Dragon SpaceX, thank you so much. That was a great event.
it looks like they wrapped up right as we went into.
We enjoyed it. Hopefully everybody else did too. We're going to go ahead and put the floater cam back in the compartment, and if there's anything else you need, just let us know.
And Dragon SpaceX, thanks. We all really enjoyed it down here. And if you don't mind holding that floater camera out still until we confirm it is off, and I will give you that go to return it once we have turned it off.
No response needed, but if you're ready, we're ready early on the Node 2 hatch, so you have a go at any time to open the Node 2 hatch. Reminder not to ingress past that yet, because we will be ventilating it. But go to open.
I'll put that in work right now.
Pretty cool there to get an inside look into the capsule a second time. Tremor looks like he's having a lot of fun. Bob and Doug also look like they're having a lot of fun. You know, can we just call them and ask for a few more views of Earth? They said they were going to keep that camera out for some stuff, right?
I definitely wish we could be in there the whole way, but we do have a couple of more major steps coming up as they are continuing to close in on the International Space Station. During that time with them inside the capsule, we passed the rendezvous complete stage, and so now we're just moving up on the approach initiation. In about 20 minutes, we're going to do something called the approach out of plane burn. And this was described to me by our lead flight director over in Houston, Zeb Scoville. As you're doing these approaches, you might have a little bit of margin that you need to clean up, and so they can do this out of plane burn just to get exactly where they want to be for that approach initiation, which we are targeting to come right at about, pull my time up again, right at about 5:09 a.m. Pacific, so in a little over an hour from now, 12:09 UTC or GMT. And that's the burn that's really going to begin putting us really close to the International Space Station.
Yeah, as we were talking about, out of plane versus in plane, if you imagine the International Space Station on sort of a flat sheet as it's going around the Earth, that's the plane of its orbit. And we're trying to make sure that the Dragon spacecraft and the International Space Station are on that same plane. Right now, the two are both co-elliptic, so they're should be pretty close. But this small out of plane burn will help us do any small corrections that we need to do so we can get that more or less perfect for the flight.
And in the meantime, we did hear that on board the International Space Station, Chris Cassidy getting the go to open up the Node 2 hatch. And so Node 2 is where they're going to be docking to today on the very forward end. There is a hatch between Node 2 itself and the pressurized mating adapter. So Chris Cassidy's going to get the go to open that up. He's not going to go inside yet. They're going to install some ducting to begin circulating some air through the pressurized mating adapter itself. And then once that's complete, he'll be able to get the APAS hatch, so the hatch on the station side configured, and that's exposed to the vacuum of space right now. And then once the Dragon docks, that will form what's called the vestibule. So two different sides of hatches normally exposed to the vacuum of space will form a tight link, and then they'll be able to pressurize that section before they actually get those hatches open.
Yeah, that's right. Dragon will be docking to the International Docking Adapter, which is attached to that pressurized mating adapter, PMA, as you might hear it called as we're listening into calls on the nets. The fun fact that both of the International Docking Adapters actually flew up on previous Dragon CRS missions. So the adapter on the V-bar, so that's, if you imagine the windward direction, as Dan had mentioned earlier, of the space station traveling through, that is where the Dragon capsule today will be targeting for docking. And actually, it's only been used once before for the Demonstration 1 mission, when that vehicle docked to space station.
And we have two of those docking adapters on the station right now. We're once again using that one in the forward part of Node 2. The other one is on a pressurized mating adapter on the Zenith part of Node 2. Zenith is just the space-facing side of the International Space Station. So if you were inside and just looking up away from planet Earth, you're looking Zenith. And so we'll have two docking adapters available for any vehicles using these international docking standards. And that's obviously the Crew Dragon, which is also a version of it going to be carrying cargo up on SpaceX's resupply missions in the future. And then somewhere down the road, we'll have the Boeing Starliner. So, I mean, we'll be in a reality where we could have two brand new spacecraft docked to the International Space Station at the same time. Could even have two Dragons there at the exact same time. We haven't used that Zenith port yet. We will have to down the road inevitably, as one thing that we're going to be looking to do is something called direct handovers. And so right now we do a lot of indirect handovers on the International Space Station, where you have one group leave, and for a period of time you only have 3 people on board, and then until another group shows up. With direct handovers, you can have 2 vehicles docked at the same time, and so you don't have those long periods of only having about 3 crew members on board. We've only had 3 crew on board since Expedition 62 ended, with Chris Cassidy the only U.S. crew member on board right now.
Yeah, so I'm sure he's excited to have 2 more U.S. crew members join him. People I'm sure he's trained with, and people. He actually flew right with Doug on the last, not the last STS mission. You mentioned a mission he flew with him.
Yeah, Cassidy flew with Doug on STS 127. That was back in 2009.
Dragon SpaceX for 3 items.
Anna. Just give us 1 second up here, and we'll be right with you.
Copy. Sounds great.
So I think the core there giving Dragon a call, probably for that rendezvous completion, and then some words about what they'll be stepping into next.
Again, the core right now is Anna Manon. She's going to be the one on console here for all of our approach and docking maneuvers coming up over the next several hours. She's the one talking directly to the crew, Bob and Doug on board Crew Dragon, doing that from Hawthorne Mission Control right behind us. Core, a brand new position in human space flight. This is the first mission it's been used on, so we've had a couple cycle through already. Just going through their different shifts with the different control teams as they shift around. As I mean, when we have humans in space, we're pretty much going around the clock. I know that the...
Go ahead for those 3 items, Anna.
At this point, you are go to stow the floater camera, and I have the burn time for approach initiation when you are ready to copy.
Houston, no 2 forward hatch open.
Station, we copy. No 2 forward hatch open.
Go to the floater, and we're ready to copy.
The burn time for approach initiation is 1209 UTC. Note that you will see approximately 1213 for the time in your displays, but we expect it to trend towards 1209.
Okay, new time for AI, 12:09. We'll see 12:13 on the displays, but it'll trend back towards 09. How copy?
Good copy. And I thirdly have a request regarding the handheld gas detectors when you are ready to copy.
Josh, a couple days ago we had a question whether or not the hatch holding mechanism was in there, and it is. We had previously grabbed
We have a request for you to please turn on the fire detector handheld gas detectors. Those are numbers 1 and 2.
Copy that.
And report readings of CO, HCl, and HCN. Then turn the draggers off, confirm they are off, and restow.
Okay, we'll turn on detectors 1 and 2. We'll get CO, HCl, and HCN readings, and then we will turn them off.
Thank you so much.
All right, so the core here in Hawthorne just running down a couple of items with Bob and Doug. One of the ones right at the top is that next big milestone that we're really looking out for, and that's that approach initiation burn. Before that happens, we'll get into the integrated operations between the team here in Hawthorne and the team out in Houston.
Yeah, that's right. The integrated operations really represents a close partnership between the operations teams at both sites. And that's because we're getting really close to space station. So we want both the teams in Hawthorne who are able to control the Dragon spacecraft and give real-time updates to how it's performing and how the systems are functioning. We want them to be completely synced up with the International Space Station. And the space station also needs to be ready to go to allow approach initiation to enter into the approach ellipsoid around the space station.
And speaking of the space station, we're getting some live views inside of Node 2. We just saw him on screen. He's floating out to get some tools for the actual hatch operations for Dragon, but this is a live view inside the International Space Station. We'll see Expedition 63 Commander Chris Cassidy in there getting the hatchway open. You can see kind of at the very far end a space that looks like it kind of dips down and then goes to a small white hatch. That's the pressurized mating adapter. So that's the attachment point, really, along with the international docking adapter between Dragon and the International Space Station. So there's a small corridor that's now exposed. Chris opened up the hatchway on Node 2 to open that up and begin circulating air through it. And there we can see him floating once again into screen. or actually that looks like Russian cosmonaut Anatoly Ivanishin, who's just going to be assisting with some of the hatch opening ops. So Chris Cassidy's going to be our prime. He's been training for this on board, and we're going to see him quite a bit once we get to that hatch opening in just a couple of hours.
Yeah, and you mentioned, circulating some air in there. I think that's something that here on Earth we take for granted.
Yeah.
The combination of convection on Earth and just fans moving air around, and also gravity and stratification of the density of fluids. So carbon dioxide being a little more dense than nitrogen and oxygen that primarily make up air. Really allows that carbon dioxide to sort of get out of the way. On Space Station, it is an enclosed space, so all of the carbon dioxide that the crew are breathing out.
Dragon SpaceX, there is an OOP burn coming up in 7 minutes.
Dragon copies.
So core letting the crew there know about the upcoming out-of-plane burn. But as I was saying, the carbon dioxide will tend to build up unless there are fans and filters to capture that. So the circulation step here is to try to get some of that air circulating, make sure that there's no unexpected or sort of stale air in that hatch. And actually Dragon has similar measures on the spacecraft to make sure it's circulating air and cleaning up that cabin environment for Bob and Doug.
Sorry, I'm trying to hold it together for a minute. We heard them call it the OOP burn, and my colleague just said OOP. There it is. The OOP is the out-of-plane burn, and as we described, as they've made all of these careful approach burns.
Dragon SpaceX, we are also less than 2.5 hours to the earliest docking time.
Dragon, detector readings if you're ready to copy, Anna.
I am ready to copy.
For the detector 1, L reading is 0.0. Detector 2, the CO is 8 parts per million, and the HCN reads negative 0.4 parts per million. How copy?
I copied HCl 0.0, CO 8 parts per million, HCN negative 0.4 parts per million.
Good copy.
Thank you so much.
We will turn them off and then put them back in volume 14.
Perfect. Thank you.
So the core, Anna, they're letting the crew know to do a quick functional test of the handheld gas detectors. We have a few of those on board Dragon if there were to be some kind of an anomaly on board the spacecraft. They help the crew diagnose whether there's any kind of an emergency situation, and just doing a quick check, making sure they're functioning as intended.
Yeah, we heard them checking for 3 different ones, and they were HCN, hydrogen cyanide, HCl, hydrogen chloride, and CO, carbon monoxide. And again, these are detectors. They are in a closed environment, so all of their atmosphere is in there with them. So onboard Dragon, and also once they're onboard station, there are always a number of detectors set up throughout, just looking for any trace contaminants, as we call them. So any very tiny bits of any of these substances that are used in spacecraft for anything from cooling the vehicles, being fuel, refrigerants, things like that. just to make sure we always have a safe breathing atmosphere through that life support system for our crew members on board. So yeah, they went through. We heard a confirmation just on our side from our life support officers in the control rooms, everything at the expected values, no concerns, and they were able to switch those detectors back off.
Yeah, and shortly here, actually, the crew, so once we get the go-ahead to do the approach initiation, the crew will also begin to don their suits. So those cool suits that they had on during the ascent portion, they'll put those back on, go through some leak checks on those suits, make sure that they're good to go, because they are getting pretty close to the space station. It's a relatively dynamic phase with a number of burns and attitude, thruster movements of the spacecraft to try to make sure you're completely centered and pointed relative to the International Space Station. So we just want the crew to be safe in their suits in case anything were to happen. They're safe and ready to go. And those suits can provide nitrox, which is a mixture of nitrogen and oxygen, or pure oxygen to the suits if the pressure were to get low enough in the cabin.
But meanwhile, we are counting down to another burn. This is going to be a really small adjustment coming up in about a minute. It's an out-of-plane burn just to really fine-tune their path and set them up for that approach initiation. Only going to be changing their velocity by about 0.66 meters per second. So again, just a really slight adjustment to the Dragon spacecraft's velocity as we get closer to that approach initiation burn, which is when things are really going to start to pick up. And again, we're tracking that in under an hour from now at about 5:09 a.m. Pacific, 12:09 GMT. So we'll stand by for one more burn. Again, we'll wait to hear out once it starts. This one's planned to be about 40 seconds in length. Again, firing those Draco thrusters to begin moving Dragon just a little bit closer, just fine-tuning its path right now before we get to approach initiation.
Yeah, and actually we saw during the 5 sort of big burns that happened earlier in the mission that the Dragon spacecraft reoriented itself. So it did what we call a slew maneuver to try to get those forward bulkhead Draco thrusters, the ones that are underneath the nose cone, or rather protected by the nose cone during the ascent portion, to get those Draco thrusters to provide most of the momentum to the spacecraft. For most of the burns going from here on, we'll actually be using the service section thrusters. So there are 12 Draco